We Saw a Thing is a movie podcast about remakes and sequels.
We saw a thing and talked about it.
This week, the guys talk about The Shop Around the Corner and You've Got Mail.
The following conversation has been edited for brevity.
The Shop Around the Corner actually made me sign up for a new streaming service, actually.
What?
Yeah, the Criterion Channel has a streaming service, and it's kind of like the only game in town for a lot of these really old movies. I signed up. I got the 14-day free trial, and the way they build their collections is different than Netflix and Disney Plus and all those, and I kind of think I'm going to stick with it.
This is Criterion Collection?
Yeah, Criterion Channel is what it's called.
Interesting.
It's got hundreds and hundreds of older movies, and they do these collections by actors. So it's like the Gary Cooper collection or the Rita Hayworth collection, and there's like 18 movies in there by each one.
Well, that's very cool.
I figure if I'm going to get through my list of quarantine watches, I need a place to go back to find the older ones, like The Shop Around the Corner from 1940, which is not on there, but it's got a charm to it that just like, it's an old folksy charm that made me think of other movies. And I don't think this is particularly the best of the older films we've watched.
No, agreed.
But there's still something charming.
I found The Shop Around the Corner more charming than You've Got Mail, even though I found that I liked the cast more in You Got Mail than The Shop Around the Corner, and I liked the conflict better in You've Got Mail. I liked that they weren't working together, but their relationship was entirely built around conflict. I liked that angle more. But also, I don't know about you, but I found The Shop Around the Corner, their love story and their letters seemed very secondary to what was happening internally at the shop.
Thank you. That is, for me, the reason I liked You've Got Mail better. I think because they fleshed it out. You almost forget that is a central plot point in The Shop Around the Corner.
It seemed like they needed to resolve the story about the shop owner and his philandering wife before they could get to James Stewart and Margaret Sullivan having this extended via letter love affair. But I also didn't like in You've Got Mail how both of the main characters already had partners. They had this like emotional affair going on via the internet, and it immediately made me like them less because I felt like they were being dishonest to their partners, neither of which seemed to be bad people.
Neither one was a bad person. They just obviously didn't love that person. They weren't getting everything they wanted from that one person. I caught that this viewing as well. Like, it's not like the whole movie, it's something they're hiding or keeping from anybody because they're living their life and it's just like a pen pal thing. But at the very beginning of the film, they make a point that they are hiding it.
Yeah, they make a point about no personal information and that kind of thing, which to me made it seem more illicit. But it was the moment at which they decided to meet where I was like, okay, I feel like now they're crossing a line, and I found that made them less likable to me.
Yeah, I honestly didn't even really think about it at that point. At that point, I just figured they're friendly with each other. Like, they're not talking about I love yous or anything. We're seeing all of that in the secondary cast members saying like, who do know about these people, but we're not seeing it to each other. They're never talking about that. They're talking about how much they love New York. They're talking about how the city has changed for them over the years. They're talking about business. They're really not talking about how they have feelings for each other, even though to other people they are.
I think it's just very clear that they do, because I'm glad that they kept that scene where they do meet in the coffee shop very similar between both movies, because that was such a strong moment in The Shop Around the Corner. That was such a great scene.
The cafe scene is almost word for word a little bit like updated, but you know, what Chappelle says before they go in is identical to The Shop Around the Corner. Him taking a chair right behind her. It is very, very much almost exactly the same. Thank God, because it's a really charming moment, and Meg Ryan and Maureen Sullivan need that moment to tell the person they're inconsequential. I think it's harder to take Maureen telling Jimmy Stewart it than Meg Ryan to Tom Hanks.
I mean, they seemed to explain it a little bit more in You've Got Mail, that she has a problem being that kind of confrontational. Whereas with Margaret Sullivan, she just seemed very confrontational and very happy to be that kind of confrontational.
That was just who she was. I wouldn't want to marry that person.
And then they explained it on the back end, like, oh, well, I thought that if I poked at you, that would get the reaction I was looking for, and it didn't work.
That came out of nowhere in The Shop Around the Corner. Came out of nowhere. Like, oh, I should tell you, by the way, I had a crush on you. And he's like, oh, I wish you had told me. Well, go enjoy your fat fiance. What was that?
Yeah, it was a weird moment to bring that up, too, when they're both talking about how they're probably going to be engaged by the time Christmas is over. Like, it was to different people.
Super weird.
Which I also found weird in both movies, because Joe and Alfred both were kind of jerks about not just being honest about the relationship from the get-go, right? Like, they both kind of string her along and lie about this other person and kind of play both sides. And I found that I liked both of them less for doing that.
In 2020 eyes, this is some serious gaslighting.
Oh, yeah, it's some creepy, creepy shit.
And I don't think that part of the film really would hold up. When this came out in 1998, it was a huge success. Built on a budget of $65 million, it grossed worldwide $250 million. It's a big film.
But this was also like this spiritual sequel to Sleepless in Seattle, was it not?
Same director, same cast, for sure. This is actually the third time that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan are a love interest in a movie, but people really don't talk about Joe versus the Volcano because it's a weird movie and Joe's trying to kill himself throughout the movie. It's a weird movie. But Sleepless in Seattle is the apex of like Nora Ephron's career, that and When Harry Met Sally. This movie is more When Harry Met Sally than Sleepless in Seattle is. From the score, from the music, being in New York, like it's almost a spiritual successor to that movie than this one. I like that in your You've Got Mail, they keep The Shop Around the Corner as the title of the store. It's like a cute little nod.
I really liked that too.
Because these are very independently different films, I think.
But I think that comes back to your point about When Harry Met Sally, because you're right. It's got a ton in common with that movie, because that movie is how they keep missing each other, if memory serves. They've got this really deep connection, this really deep friendship, and it takes all of those years for them to realize that it's more than that. And so you're right, it's got a ton in common with that kind of story.
Both films have that personality based on the music and New York. Those two things for Nora Ephron are kind of what people glammed onto when making more romantic comedies post When Harry Met Sally, because, you know, Nora Ephron sort of started the chick flick thing, or at least that's how she's known, with these little personality-driven romantic comedies. Obviously, taking place in New York is a big factor. One of the cool things about The Shop Around the Corner I found is that it's not in America. It could be anywhere, but it's strange that it is in Hungary.
I had meant to look up why and forgot.
So this is based on a play.
It had a feel that it was based on a play.
And the play is Hungarian. So I think they took the play and they just used every aspect of it. And it's like, okay, if it's in Hungary, then it's in Hungary. I think they both have so much different to them that you can kind of look at them differently. But the core aspect is there's a pen pal. There's another story about their life, because I don't get why James Stewart and Sullivan hate each other in the movie.
Yeah, that wasn't well established, which is why I'm glad that they changed that relationship in You've Got Mail so that they did have built-in conflict. It made more sense in You've Got Mail. And that's why, again, and we started talking about that, The Shop Around the Corner seems more about the shop than it does about them.
Right. Because you have this really, really modern take of basically Barnes & Noble coming in and destroying the bookstore in the Upper West Side, it's relatable to modern audiences immediately, especially people like you and I who live in a large city where this happens constantly to local businesses. And it gives us that secondary story of the store closing, which is actually a remarkably awesome piece of the movie, is watching Meg Ryan close her mother's store and having that sense of closure. It's almost like we're removed from the cutesy little rom-com and you get a very interesting picture of who this person is.
I also noticed that it felt like each movie had a very different take on capitalism. Like The Shop Around the Corner, there's a big moment in that movie about how much money they made on Christmas Eve and how that seems to bring them all together as a family. Like, they work in this place and it becomes their family, and the capitalism drives that feeling of family. Whereas in You've Got Mail, there's this sense that big capitalistic business interests come in and take over these family-run places that are more about heart and connection with people. And they had very, very opposing takes on that kind of capitalistic view.
You've Got Mail is saying a lot about what New Yorkers think of New York. Because at the time this movie came out, there was a Barnes & Noble that was moving into the Upper West Side. And all of the local people were like, no, we don't want it. Get it out of here. And it actually destroyed that location for Barnes & Noble. Obviously, it really works out for Fox Books in this one. Because everybody's just really happy it's there.
Yeah, it was an interesting sort of B plot to the whole thing, because you're right, it did make me care more about Meg Ryan and give us more perspective on her childhood, her connection with her mother, how much the store means to her. That scene where she goes and walks through the Fox bookstore and the Fox employee has no idea about the book that the woman is asking about, and she has all this information. And then we kind of get this moment sort of near the end where Joe seems like he's talking about the fact that he's hired some of her staff now and that they know things about books, and so that's been helpful for him.
That's right. I mean, it also is very strange that a Fox Books would be that worried about their children's section of all things. Maybe children's books sell way more than normal books. If that was the case, wouldn't there be more children's bookstores everywhere?
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We talked about this when we did Psycho, about how as soon as you add smartphones, you have to change things fundamentally about the way that story is plotted. And I think that's the same with this. The Shop Around the Corner really relied on the length of time that it took for them to kind of build this relationship via handwritten mail. And You've Got Mail really relied on the fact that they didn't have this in their pocket, at a moment's notice connection to each other. There was thought behind it. There was intention behind it. They weren't just talking about the minutia of their day. They were having in-depth, deep conversations about things. And the second you add smartphones to that, it becomes a little bit more throwaway. And their connection, especially over that length of time, maybe doesn't deepen in the same way or have that same kind of special factor.
I'm really glad you said that, because you're right. Okay, so 1998, I am almost graduated high school, and I remember sending long form emails. I had people that I liked, and we would actually send in-depth emails, and then you walked away and you'd have to come back and read a whole couple paragraphs or whatever. It almost felt like nostalgia for a time when we couldn't just zap over 4 words of dude, wanna get beer? There was thought, and those thoughts I found were really cool to listen in on.
I agree with you. It's so interesting that my perspective on this is ever so slightly different than yours, being just a couple years younger. My experience with technology through high school wasn't email. It was ICQ and the early days of MSN Messenger. It was the very, very start of instant messaging, but you still had to be physically in front of a computer connected to the internet. It wasn't just on your person. And I remember entire nights chatting with dozens of people all at the same time and how that was such like a new, exciting way to communicate with people. But you still had to be physically in the space to do it. You couldn't just carry that with you.
I remember my first chat was MIRC, and it was just a chat room. It wasn't actually like a peer-to-peer thing yet. You had to like log on and you just saw a bunch of things, and that was probably 96, but you didn't need an email address like you do now for everything. You could just log in with whatever you wanted, and that was fine. So that's what I used to use before the ICQ that probably came when I was 18 and graduating high school, because I was definitely on those platforms too. I just think I was a little later to it than you guys, maybe. Maybe I adopted it while I was 19.
But it's interesting looking back on that now as, you know, our like mid-late 30-somethings that we are. I watch a movie like The Shop Around the Corner and You've Got Mail, and I have nostalgia for a thing that I don't think I ever had in my life, which is that kind of intentional communication. It would almost have to be more intentional to do that now, because you would have to kind of go out of your way to avoid easier ways of communication.
So let's talk really quickly about the success of both of these films. Came out in 1940 in January. Out of the 29 critics who have reviewed it, I suppose, on Rotten Tomatoes, it's 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. Obviously, Rotten Tomatoes didn't exist in 1940, but we can believe that its critical success is amazing. It has become a Christmas movie somehow. It is a very small bit of Christmas. There's obviously consumerism. It's strange to me that someone would choose this as a movie to put on at Christmas time.
Yeah, I'm having trouble wrapping my head around that.
Well, I mean, like, the only thing that happens is they talk about a Christmas dinner, and Rudy, the new page boy or whatever his role was, gets to go have dinner with the owner of the company, because obviously he has no wife.
The Christmas Eve day of sales is like a very, very big deal plot-wise to this movie.
Absolutely. You've got a new manager in charge. Everybody's like, let's bring one in for the big boss. And they do really well, and everybody gets bonuses.
They're decorating for Christmas, and they need those nights off to go meet each other.
We get to watch Alfred, like, physically assault one of his coworkers, which is great.
Yeah, assaulting. But calling this a Christmas movie is like calling Die Hard a Christmas movie. Just because a part of a movie or all of a movie takes place around Christmas doesn't necessarily mean it's a Christmas movie.
I mean, I've been arguing that It's a Wonderful Life is not a great Christmas movie for years. It is about a man trying to kill himself.
Yeah, that's not like super touching at Christmas. I don't know.
Well, what about this? Okay, it's 1940. This movie cost $500,000 to make.
Wow.
I guess these were big stars. Like, that time Jimmy Stewart was an Oscar winner. They're big names, but it's also like one set location. Or maybe two.
Yeah, this was like the bottle episode of movies.
Right. And it did not make its money back. But again, like, I don't know how Hollywood survived it all in the 40s, because this was a $500,000 movie. It made back worldwide $36,000. In today's dollars, that is the worst a movie could do. But this is a big movie. I guess they recoup their costs much, much, much later. Maybe TV rights to play it on TV. Maybe they play it at Christmas time. I don't know.
Took them 50, 60 years, but they recouped their money.
Yeah, this is a really insane. What's the business model in the 40s in Hollywood?
I think this is the first James Stewart movie I've seen. He's got one of those voices, and his inflection is his cadence is distinct.
It's golden age Hollywood cadence.
And he's become like the voice that people imitate when they're trying to do that kind of era. I had the imitation in my head, and so when I heard him speak that way, and this is the first time I've probably seen him in anything, and it took me out of it for a second, right? Where I was like, oh, geez, he actually sounded like that. Again, I just keep talking about how I'm really enjoying what we're doing with these kinds of movies, because these are movies that I wouldn't have watched without this podcast. And I think this is the first time since we've done this, like, watch the original and the remake series of episodes, that I've enjoyed both of them.
I did enjoy both of them myself as well. Like, You've Got Mail. Let's talk about the critical success of this. It's a fresh movie on Rotten Tomatoes as well. Not as fresh. It's 69% on Rotten Tomatoes. It's not like a home run, because I don't think the movie is a home run. But when you get a movie that's like this level romance and you put New York in it, for me, whatever it is, I'm in. New York is such an important piece of my love story that whenever there's any romance in New York, I am drawn. Just so our audience knows, I screwed up with my wife before we actually got together. She wasn't talking to me. She was like, I'm done with you. And I went to New York with a friend and I saw the Bow Bridge in Central Park. And this was months and months after our argument, where we decided we had an argument where we decided no, we're not going to go out. For whatever reason, I saw that Bow Bridge and I wanted to get in touch with her, and I did. And luckily, she 3 days later was receptive. And, about a month later, we went on a date and now we're married. So New York and romance is a big deal for me. And I do find You've Got Mail just as romantic about New York as it is about its leads.
You were talking earlier about the experience of smaller shops being taken over by larger big boxes and New Yorkers having opinions about stuff like that. Some of my favorite things about New York are the smaller stores and the little things that you just kind of trip over, and the restaurants that are just, they look like a hole in the wall and you walk in and the food's amazing. And New York's got so much of that character and that personality, as well as so many of the big box stores and the glitz and glamour and the bright lights and the noise. It's somehow managed to maintain both of those things. And so I think that a city like New York allows for a certain type of storytelling that other cities maybe don't.
I agree with that. Also, a lot of people who live in the city are, and I'm not saying all of them, if you are one of these people who live in the city or a little bit older and established, you might have a place in the city, but it also really is conducive when you're single to live in a city. You can move around quicker. You can get to stuff quicker. It's easier to have a place by yourself because everything's small anyways, so why not? Obviously, that is not a problem with our two leads, who have amazing apartments because they're so well off with this little dinky store, and also one's a millionaire.
Yes, exactly. Meg Ryan's living that friend's apartment life with probably just a sweet deal with rent control. It was her mom's apartment before, and it's been in the family for 60 years, and she's paying $80 a month for it.
That's exactly it. She just lived there her whole life. Her mother passed away. She got the place.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what's really interesting is that this is, again, 1998. We've talked about our technology at that time. But for Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan, they were older when they made these movies. Meg Ryan didn't even own a computer. Tom Hanks was married. They actually emailed each other back and forth to prepare for the idea of what that would look like on film.
Yeah, it's so funny that movies that are based in this time that have some sort of technology element, how the technology part of it ages so poorly. And you forget that this wasn't that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things, but how much things have changed in such a short period of time. And so the things like, AOL, that whole You've Got Mail thing, not really a thing anymore.
That is not a thing.
That would have been so ubiquitous. That would have been a thing that everyone was like, yeah, I know what that sounds like. I know that sound, because that was people's daily experience at that point.
But you're right, not now.
They've got laptops, but they're still hardwired into an internet connection or a phone line. And then that whole opening sequence with the digital zoom in on Manhattan, and so much of that stuff ages so poorly.
Which in this context of the film was panned in reviews as that does not even look remotely like something you should use,
right?
Because it was so dated at that time.
Oh, interesting.
You got to understand, we had Toy Story at this point.
Oh, that's right.
Tom Hanks had starred in Toy Story. So we knew there was better stuff. This was just a weird way to convey computer that everybody thought still at that time was Well, come on, we're past that.
Well, I also really enjoyed the scandalized discussion of cybersex, which was so interesting. I'm just glad that they moved past some of that stuff quickly.
They had to, right? There wasn't the boom of internet dating even at that time. It was still you got to be very careful who you meet online. You still do, but now it is so accepted to meet somebody online. There's zero stigma. It's how almost every couple I know has met. It's so normal now to just pick up Tinder, pick up, Bumble Look, you probably have a million different ideas of what is out there. I don't know. I haven't been out there in a while.
Yeah, you're an old married man now. What do you know?
I'm an old married man. I think the last thing I was on was OkCupid and Plenty of Fish. I'm sure there are a lot of other ones. I do want to just jump back to that infidelity business, because obviously everybody has friends that they talk to outside of their relationship. These two, it is so clear they're in love with these two. Looking at their partners, Greg Kinnear was pretty cool with the fact that she didn't love him. He was totally fine.
Yeah, but I think he was totally fine because he was the one initiating that conversation.
Yeah, he didn't love her. And then Parker Posey, who's to say how that went down, but she wasn't a great partner.
No, I think Parker Posey is just kind of incidental to the whole thing, right? It clearly giving them partners was an excuse to let them have more dialogue with people other than friends, right? It was just about making them a little bit more three-dimensional. As far as Parker Posey goes, I think she should be in everything. I love Parker Posey. I think she's wonderful. But she kind of plays a similar character in a lot of these things, right? What they didn't lean into enough was that she's kind of vapid, and there were hints of that. But with Greg Kinnear, he just seemed like this sweet kind of bumbling guy who realized that he just wasn't in love with Meg Ryan, and then seemed very relieved that she also wasn't in love with him.
Yeah, which this is not how relationships end. Relationships do not end this way in real life.
But he seemed like a relatively nice guy.
Yeah, he was super neurotic, and he did forgive her for not voting, which was super pretentious. Fine. They go out of their way to show that these people do not mesh the way that Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan mesh. I think both of these movies are totally watchable. I do think that Jimmy Stewart is the predecessor to bring in Tom Hanks. I think they are just Hollywood easy. Just put them in something and people like them.
Yeah, that's fair.
But mind you, I've seen more Jimmy Stewart than you. He's so likable. And I just look at him and I'm like, yeah, you could be a Tom Hanks descendant.
As we are talking about You've Got Mail, because I finished watching it literally just before we started recording, the more I'm realizing that most of the things that I liked about You've Got Mail were the charisma of the people who were in it. I really like Steve Zahn. I really like Parker Posey. I really like Greg Kinnear. I really like Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. I really like them together. There's just a ton of charm from the acting and the actors in this movie.
What I've learned is that if your film is charming, we'll give it way more leash. Yeah. Because we should not like Tom Hanks for bleeding her on. We should not like Jimmy Stewart for being you almost left her in that coffee shop and then you did leave her in that coffee shop not knowing, to make it think you didn't show up, you jackass. But because you're charming, we give it to you.
To me, Jimmy Stewart is the worst version of this character because he spends so much time being disparaging about her pen pal.
The other weird difference in this, he's been a pen pal for a long time, never met this person, but 100% wants to marry this person.
Yes.
It is totally different in 2020 to look back and go, oh, wow, the first time they kiss, they're engaged.
And there's that whole manipulation factor to make sure that he gets a wallet.
Oh, that was some bullshit. But also, Tom Hanks, the 152 insights into my soul bit, to knock it down. And not to mention, he's married and then going back and not answering. I'm like, man, this is so bullshit.
Yeah, oh yeah. I have a feeling that they have their kiss in the park with the dog and it's all romantic and the credits roll and the Marvel Cinematic Universe bonus scene at the end is her going, wait a second. You're a huge piece of shit.
Yes! Because you gotta imagine they're having a huge fight about this after that kiss. Okay, great first kiss. So glad it's you. Now let's talk about how long you lied about this.
Let's talk for a second about how you told me your feelings in the hours leading up to you knowing I'm going to meet this person for the first time.
Oh, that was also such a dick move.
How conflicted is she gonna be in that moment?
Oh, the difference 20 years makes.
Dude, I don't know. That's just angering to me.
Next time on We Saw a Thing.
We had so much fun with Alfred Hitchcock last week. We're diving into one of his thrillers next week. Dial M for Murder was remade in 1998. Let's see if Michael Douglas and Gwyneth Paltrow can do any better in A Perfect Murder than Vince Vaughn did in Psycho. God, that Psycho remake was bad.
We Saw a Thing is hosted by Jay Kennedy and Chris Shapcott. Produced by Shapcuts Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And check our show notes for links to our social media and credits. And leave a review on Apple Podcasts.